You might think of Cambodia only for its stunning ancient temples, but the truth is, this nation has one of the most incredible survival stories on the planet. It's filled with imperial power, devastating darkness, and total rebirth. So sit back, because we're diving into its epic saga, starting with the Golden Age that literally shaped Southeast Asia. Our story begins in the year 802 AD with the rise of the Khmer Empire, and their biggest contribution was in engineering. They built massive reservoirs and intricate canal systems to manage water and feed a huge population. And this brilliance allowed them to build those epic, jaw-dropping temple complexes like Angkor Wat. They were ruled by god-kings, and for over 600 years, this empire was the dominant power in the region. But, like all great empires, it eventually faded. And over the next 200 years, the empire began to shrink as powerful tributary states, especially those in what is now Thailand, started declaring their independence and invading Khmer territory. And by 1450 or so, after years of internal struggle of maintaining their vast water networks, the court made a huge decision. They shifted their heartland south towards the region of present-day Phnom Penh, where it has remained ever since. This centuries-long decline meant Cambodia faced relentless pressure from its neighbours, Thailand and Vietnam. Then, by the mid-19th century, conflicts between these powerful neighbours often spilled onto Cambodian soil, and the kingdom was dangerously close to vanishing completely. Now, fast forward to 1863, and the Cambodian king made a strategic move. He asked France to provide protection, so Cambodia became a French protectorate. But the protectorate quickly developed into a full-scale colonial relationship that the king absolutely didn't see coming. Eventually, French rule lasted until the 1950s. Fortunately, it wasn't all bad. The French invested in infrastructure, which slowly brought Cambodia into the developed world. But arguably France's greatest contribution was restoring those incredible ruins. French scholars deciphered the ancient Angkorian inscriptions and rebuilt many of the temples, effectively handing Cambodians a glorious, precisely dated past that had been largely forgotten. This is where a young man named Prince Norodom Sihanouk steps onto the stage in 1941. He's arguably the most famous and pivotal figure in modern Cambodian history. And let me tell you why. For context, World War II temporarily saw a Japanese occupation, which disrupted the French rule. But as soon as that ended, guess what? France immediately tried to reimpose its full colonial authority. Sihanouk, however, was determined to regain full sovereignty. So, he launched what he called a royal crusade for independence, and, with a brilliant bit of diplomatic manoeuvring against the weakened French, got France to finally grant full independence in 1953. And this singular achievement instantly made him a national hero. After independence, Cambodia entered what many older Khmer people look back on as a short period of peace and prosperity, or a real golden age, if you will. At this time, Sihanouk realised being a constitutional monarch wasn't enough for him to truly run the country. So, in 1955, he made an unprecedented move. He abdicated the throne to his father so he could enter politics directly as a prime minister and head of state. He wanted to run the show, and he did, navigating the extremely tricky waters of the Cold War by adopting a strict policy of neutrality. That neutrality was put to the ultimate test when the Vietnam War ramped up right next door. And by the late 1960s, Cambodia was being drawn into that conflict. Sihanouk felt compelled to break ties with the US and allowed North Vietnamese forces to use bases and supply routes in eastern Cambodia as part of their war effort against the South. The US responded in kind, and in 1969, they launched a massive secret bombing campaign across Cambodia's eastern border to disrupt those supply lines. This aggressive move completely destabilized the country, fracturing the rural population and driving huge numbers of poor, rural peasants into the arms of a radical new movement that had been quietly forming in the jungle. And here's where the story takes a turn. In 1970, while Sihanouk was out of the country, he was overthrown in a military coup by his own Prime Minister, Lon Nol, who was backed by the US. Sihanouk, desperate to regain power, did the unthinkable. He formed an alliance in exile with the very communist guerrillas his army had been fighting. These group of people were known to the outside world as the Khmer Rouge, or Red Khmers. They're driven by a radical, isolationist and extreme Maoist ideology. and the Khmer Rouge, led by Pol Pot, seized power across the entire country in April 1975, overthrowing the pro-American regime. They immediately declared it Year Zero. And their goal was simple: to create a purely agrarian, classless society, instantly free of all foreign influence and intellectualism. They instantly evacuated every city, forcing millions of urban dwellers into the countryside to work in labour camps on collective farms. Not only that, but they also abolished money, private property, and religion. And the result? In the Khmer Rouge era that followed, at least 1.2 million Cambodians died of malnutrition, overwork, executions, and mistreated diseases as the regime sought to achieve total communism overnight. The Khmer Rouge's horrific reign was finally ended in 1979, but ironically not by Cambodians themselves. The thing is, when the Khmer Rouge started aggressive border attacks, Vietnam fought back and invaded Cambodia. The Vietnamese quickly established a protectorate there that lasted for 10 years, installing a new pro-Vietnamese government. But the remnants of the Khmer Rouge retreated to the jungles and mountains and continued a brutal guerrilla war for well over a decade. It took over 10 years of brutal fighting and huge international meetings, but things finally changed. They signed a big peace deal in Paris in 1991, and after that, the United Nations actually entered the picture to protect the country and prepare it for general elections, which happened in 1993. Since the elections, Cambodia has been a constitutional monarchy run by a shared government. It started reconnecting with the world too, because in 1999, it finally joined ASEAN, ending centuries of being kind of isolated. But let's be real, it hasn't been smooth sailing. The country got a lot of foreign aid, sure, but there have been huge political fights, including a violent coup back in 1997 by a man who ended up running things for decades, Hun Sen. And today, the political spotlight is shifting once again because Hun Sen recently stepped down, but he endorsed his son, Hun Manet, to take over, keeping the power right there. But more on that later. For now, let's zoom out and talk about what makes its geography so unique. Cambodia, officially the Kingdom of Cambodia, covers an area of over 181,000 square kilometres. That's about 69,900 square miles. It's bordered by Thailand to the northwest, Laos to the north, and Vietnam to the east and southeast, and it has this little, lovely stretch of coastline along the Gulf of Thailand. So if you look at the map, you'll see Cambodia is basically structured around a vast, low-lying central plain. And this flat heartland is dominated by two features, the Mekong River and the Tonle Sap Lake. The Mekong River is, quite simply, the nation's lifeblood. It flows through Cambodia, originating all the way back in the Tibetan highlands. And below the capital, Phnom Penh, it splits into two channels, the main Mekong and the Bassac River, creating the start of the massive Mekong Delta, which flows toward Vietnam and the South China Sea. Now that brings us to the most incredible geographical phenomenon, the Tonle Sap. It's this freshwater lake in west-central Cambodia, connected to the Mekong at Phnom Penh. This connection creates a cycle unlike anywhere else in the world. During the dry season, the lake drains out into the Mekong, but when the monsoon rains hit in June, the Mekong swells so much that the water flow actually reverses, forcing the water back up into the Tonle Sap. This causes the lake to more than double in size, flooding the surrounding marshland and depositing rich, fertile sediment everywhere. That flooding and shrinking cycle is why the Tonle Sap is one of the richest sources of freshwater fish in the entire world. So, while the centre is a big plain of rice paddies and wetlands, Cambodia is fringed by three major mountain ranges. In the southwest, you have the Cardamom Mountains and the Elephant Mountains. The Cardamom Range holds Cambodia's highest peak, Phnom Oral, which clocks in at 1,813 metres, or 5,948 feet. These slopes are drenched in rain and blanketed in beautiful virgin rainforests. And if you head further south, you hit the southern coast, a narrow strip with beautiful beaches, like those in the port city of Sihanoukville, backed by dense mangrove forests. Then, up in the north, you find the Dangrek Mountains, which form a natural border with Thailand. And speaking of the north, remember how we talked about the Khmer Empire's golden age? Yeah, their majestic ruins are still found in the forest just north of the Tonle Sap. We're talking about Angkor Thom and the world-famous Angkor Wat. Angkor Wat itself is the largest religious edifice in the entire world. It was originally a Hindu temple, later adapted to Buddhism, and its 5 central towers represent the peaks of Mount Meru, the mythical centre of the universe. It's an architectural masterpiece that perfectly shows how the Khmer people and their powerful, water-based empire mastered this specific landscape. As for cities, the capital's Phnom Penh. It's home to about 1 million people and sits right at the junction of the Mekong, the Bassac, and the Tonle Sap Channel. It's a mix of old French colonial architecture and new sprawling development, but despite recent improvements in the main thoroughfares, it still struggles with basic infrastructure outside the centre, because the moment you leave Phnom Penh, you realise how rural Cambodia still is. In fact, the second largest city, Battambang, has a population of only about 200,000 people, and it can still take up to 6 hours to drive there from the capital. So that's the map. But to really get what's happening in modern Cambodia, you've got to look at who's actually running the show. See, officially, it's a constitutional monarchy. That means they have a king, Norodom Sihamoni, who's the head of state, but the real political muscle is somewhere else. The day-to-day power has been in the hands of one person and one party for ages. We talked about Hun Sen a bit earlier, right? Well, after his coup back in 1997, he served as Prime Minister for over 3 decades. That makes him one of the longest-serving non-royal leaders in the entire world. Even after he stepped down in 2023, he's still a huge deal because he basically handed the job over to his son, Hun Manet, ensuring the family stays in charge. So the ruling Cambodian People's Party, or CPP, dominates everything. It's less of a multi-party democracy and more like a one-party state, and that dominance affects how they manage the books. Which brings us to the economic landscape. Cambodia's economy is a fascinating, fast-paced story, but it's constantly dodging external threats. Its main engine is its industrial sector, especially all those garment and non-garment factories. In 2024, the economy was booming, expanding by a strong 6%, which ultimately amounted to $46.35 billion. But even with that growth, the future is looking a little bumpy, mostly due to global trade fights, especially with the US. AMRO, the research group, is projecting growth will slow a bit, maybe to 5.2% in 2025 and then down to 4.7% in 2026. And the Asian Development Bank is saying something similar. Why? Because these forecasts are sensitive to trade policy. The fact that the US tariffs were lowered to 19% is a huge win, because if they'd stuck with the higher planned rate of 36%, growth could have easily plunged to 4% or less. Despite that uncertainty, the building trend is strong. In the first 9 months of 2025, Cambodia sold $22.3 billion worth of goods to the world, and the garment industry saw exports up 19%. What's even better news is that the country is investing heavily in its future. Imports are up 17%, but it's not like people are just buying a bunch of extra stuff. They're buying capital equipment, or stuff for building, which means imports of mechanical equipment are up a massive 52%, electrical machinery is up 42%, and iron and steel are up a combined 59%. That clearly shows companies are investing and deepening Cambodia's manufacturing capacity, which is great for the long run. But amidst all that, the Cambodian people remain at the centre, and the easiest way to understand the culture here is to start with Buddhism. That's because about 95% of Cambodians practice Theravada Buddhism. This is one of the oldest versions of the religion, which we've seen earlier in the video. But today, while almost everyone is Buddhist, you'll find pockets of other faiths. The Cham people are historically Muslim, and there are small communities of Khmer and Vietnamese Catholics floating around, plus some remote groups in countrysides who still practice animist rituals. Speaking of the countrysides, let's talk about the best part, the food. The rural diet is simple, based on rice and fish, but it is delicious. The magic comes from the flavours they use, like hot peppers, mint, lemongrass, ginger, and this famous pungent spiced fish paste called prahok. And if you visit, you must try kha thieu. It's a glorious pork and rice noodle soup. And of course, they use all those amazing tropical fruits like mangoes and durians. Now here's a tip. The Khmer are really modest dressers, so leave the revealing clothes at home, especially if you plan on visiting a pagoda. Bare shoulders or knees are considered disrespectful, and if you go to a place like the Royal Palace in Phnom Penh and you're not covered up, they'll rent you a pair of those one-size-fits-nobody long trousers for $2 just so you can get in. But beyond these wardrobe rules, the best way to see the Khmer spirit is through their incredible festivals. You've got the victory over Pol Pot on January 7th, the huge 3-day blowout of Khmer New Year in mid-April, and the spectacular Bon Om Tuk, the Water and Moon Festival in early November, which celebrates that incredible annual flow reversal of the Tonle Sap. And if you're lucky enough to score an invite to a Khmer wedding, hold on to your hat, because they are loud, colourful parties that can traditionally last 2 or 3 days. The guest list is massive, sometimes over 1,000 people. You give a small cash gift, and if you're a barang or a foreigner, be ready to toast the happy couple many, many times. So, from the massive engineering feats of the Khmer Empire to the complex political transitions of today, Cambodia's story is one of profound cultural depth and unwavering national resilience. Now, if you could visit one place mentioned in the video, be it the ancient temples of Angkor Wat or the vibrant Bon Om Tuk festival, which one would you choose? Sound off in the comments section below. And as always, if you loved this video, you're going to enjoy this next one.